take a very different perspective on anxiety during menopause today with my next guest, Tracy Dennis-Tiwary. She has a PhD and is a professor of psychology and neuroscience, the director of the Emotion Regulation Lab, and co-executive director of the Center for Health Technology at Hunter College in New York City, where the mission is to connect researchers, community stakeholders, and technology innovators to bridge the healthcare gap. Now, she has a very interesting role as a founder and CSO of Arcade Therapeutics, where she translates neuroscience and cognitive therapy techniques into gamified, clinically validated digital therapeutics for mental health. And she is a busy mama. She's published over 100 scientific articles and delivered over 400 presentations at academic conferences and for corporate clients. You may have seen her in the media, where she's been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. She's been on ABC television networks, CBS, CNN, NPR, the Today Show, and Bloomberg Television. So she's been around, guys. Now, without further ado, let's welcome Tracy Dennis-Tiwary. Welcome.
Thank you, Zora. It's great to be with you.
So, okay, we're going to tackle this topic that comes up a lot in discussions on menopause, and that's anxiety. It's one of the 34 symptoms of menopause, but I'd like to first have you define what that means and how anxiety differs from, say, depression, stress, and some anxiety disorders. So what's your definition?
Well, for the very first thing to start with that's super, I think, critical to understand is that anxiety is an emotion. So let me repeat that. And I repeat it because when we think anxiety and people say things like, I have anxiety, or, oh my gosh, I was born anxious, they mean an anxiety disorder. And so, or anxiety that's debilitating. So I really want to make that distinction that anxiety is actually an emotion that we all have. So we're all born anxious. And it's a particular emotion. And like all emotions, it actually evolved to be helpful to us, which is surprising because it feels so bad.
Yeah.
But it evolved to be helpful because it shows up when we're facing something uncertain about the future, which by the future is by definition uncertain, right? But we don't always feel that uncertainty, but especially in times when we're going through transitions or in uncertain times like we're experiencing today. Peri-pandemic. We're, you can be perimenopause, peri-pandemic. You can be like, it's a lot.
Or both.
Or both. And, so a lot of us have experienced anxiety. And the really important thing is that it shows up when we're uncertain, because it's there to help us actually visualize and think about that future, because something bad could happen, right, when we feel anxious, but something good is still possible. And anxiety tells us that's the case. It makes us sit up and pay attention to tell us there's something you can do. It's an activating emotion. So it actually is making us into mental time travelers. We can run the what if simulation. So tomorrow I have a job interview, for example, perhaps, and I know that I could bomb it and I'm feeling anxious about that. But I also know that I could crush it and get the job of my dreams. So because of that information of negativity and positivity, of worry and hope, we're actually prepared to focus, to persist, to innovate. The emotion of anxiety keeps us moving forward like a wave. Now, it's a really hard wave to ride because it's unpleasant. And our instinct and everything that we hear around us in the self-help world tells us, get rid of it, fix it. But the truth is, that's the worst thing you can do when it comes to anxiety, because that means that you're contracting and distorting yourself so you don't feel that emotion. And actually, the only way out is through. So when you allow yourself to feel it, that's when you can figure out, this is a really tumultuous wave. It's really overwhelming sometimes, but I can learn to swim, and I can learn to surf, and I can learn to sail. And this is my opportunity to engage with this difficult emotion and know that it's pointing me towards a future that I care about and that I want. Like, I want to get that job that I care about. And so I'm going to work hard and persist and do everything I can. So that's a very long-winded definition, non-scientific definition of anxiety, but it is an emotion and it's there to serve us. And the problem is we reject it and we just don't want to engage it anymore and learn how to live with it.
You're right in the fact that it is an emotion that we put a negative connotation to. We don't want to have it. Let's get rid of it. That makes perfect sense. And I'm glad you define it, because when my daughter was 16, she came to me and she said, I have to tell you something. And I was like, oh no, she's pregnant. Oh, what happened? I freaked out. And she said, I have anxiety. And I said, well, what does that mean? Like, at the time, I had no clue. I said, I don't see you having, out of breath, that stereotypical, stressed out person. She's actually quite calm. She told me the other day she'd like to do some parachuting. So I was lost. I was like, how in the world does she have anxiety? And so she said, well, she spoke to some friends and they said, we don't feel like that. You should go talk to your mom. So over the years, I've learned actually what that could mean. And I guess there's a spectrum and there's so many different types. And I felt like such a failed mom. I was like, how could I not see this? Like, wow, I was clueless. How did I not see?
Yeah.
And evidently there's anxiety that's very suppressed. And there's these feelings, like you said, you have, and it's not necessarily just your character, but I guess there are people who are born maybe with more anxious, but like you said, a feeling. And I'm glad you define that. And
right. And my kids come to me and say they're anxious all the time. And I worry about my kids too. So, but really my first response that I try to have is, well, good, because I'm anxious too. We're all born anxious. Now, what do we do with it? Let's figure out how to use this as a superpower. So we have to normalize it. And just to distinguish it from an anxiety disorder. And it's interesting, your mind and most of our minds go to, oh, she says she has anxiety, so she means she's having a panic attack, or she's out of breath, or she's overwhelmed, right? But when we have an anxiety disorder, it's not that we have too much anxiety, because you could have anxiety every day, experience it every day, which probably we do on some level, right? Because it's a spectrum, from butterflies in your stomach to full-blown panic, right? So, but you could have it every day and you wouldn't be diagnosed with an anxiety disorder unless the ways that you cope with that anxiety are getting in the way. That means functional impairment. So if I'm socially anxious, I fear people's judgment of me or public embarrassment, then that's something I can cope with. But then if I stop going to work, if I don't do podcasts anymore, if I cut off from my friends, if I isolate myself at home, it's that avoidance of the experience of anxiety, that contortion we do to not feel it. That's what actually qualifies us for an anxiety disorder diagnosis. And when you go to therapy, as we should when we're struggling, what is the frontline gold standard treatment? Engage those feelings, learn to feel them again, and work through them. So whether it's day-to-day anxieties like all of us experience, an ebb and flow, or if it's a full-blown anxiety disorder, the solution remains the same. And all of our language about anxiety, right, that it's sort of despair and dysfunction, like, oh, I'm broken, like, oh, I have anxiety, something's wrong with me. If we can start to shift that, we'll start to avoid less, we'll start to build more anxiety skills, and maybe we won't go down that path to an anxiety disorder. And even if we do have an anxiety disorder, we can still have that mindset and benefit from therapies and support. And, whether that's a therapist or whether that's a spiritual counselor or whether that's a really good friend that you love to have coffee with. So I think that's just so, before anything else, if we can start to change that conversation, everything else will be better when it comes to anxiety.
So it sounds like the coping mechanism is really key. And when I'm wondering how many people get this, especially women in menopause, get this sort of diagnosis of, I don't know, either, okay, you're stressed out, you have anxiety, or you're depression. My daughter, what the therapist did, she gave her some cognitive behavioral techniques, some ideas, but she also wanted to give her some medication. And I was like, oh, she's 16. Let her, try for some other things before we actually hit that road. But I believe that a lot of women in their 50s or going through the perimenopause in their 40s are given medication when perhaps it could be solved by something else, or maybe not. I think that it's such a fine line. Like, where do we decide, okay, do we actually have depression? It's debilitating us, or is it just hormones or something different? How often do you think medication is actually the solution?
It's such an important question. And I just want to echo you that it really is an individual choice. It has to be individual on an individual basis. But here's what I do know about medication, especially anti-anxiety medications like the benzodiazepines. They're overprescribed, right? It's like it's sort of like we take it like aspirin sometimes because we assume we have to just kill the pain of anxiety immediately. It's very addictive and dangerous. So, and the other thing is when we take benzodiazepines for a long period of time, it actually causes neuroadaptive changes where our brain kind of our brain actually baseline anxiety rises over time. So when you try to get off benzos, you actually feel even more anxious than when you began sometimes. Because what medications treat are just symptoms. They don't treat anything about the cause of anxiety. Now, having said that, just to be really aware of some of the risks, what medications are really good for is, and what they were designed to do and what research shows us, is that they're meant to be used temporarily to bring us back to a baseline, right? Of if we're, because if we're so anxious all the time and so activated and so highly, if we are, as you described this, we're constantly feeling on the edge of panic, we can't make our best choices under those circumstances. We can't benefit from cognitive behavioral therapy. So in that case, taking medication for a short period of time brings us back to the baseline. And then but then we need to try these other techniques. It's sort of like the medication is like giving it's, the old biblical adage, you can give a person a fish and they'll eat for a day, or you can teach them to fish and they'll eat for a lifetime. Benzos and anti-anxiety medications are giving someone a fish. CBT is teaching them to fish for a lifetime. Another metaphor that a young person I spoke to once who'd been taking medication on and off said, I realized that what medication is really good at is helping me step into the boxing ring, so to speak. Like it lets me get to a place where I can step into the boxing ring, but then I have to put on my boxing gloves and I have to fight the fight. I have to do the work. So I think when we shift to thinking it about that way, then we can make some good choices for ourselves about if and when and how we use medication to get us to a place so we can put on our boxing gloves and do the work. Because being human is really messy work, and mental health is not the absence of struggle. It's not the absence of negative feelings. It's actually the ability to feel those feelings and to be flexible when life throws us all these curveballs. And that's messy. That's not easy. And that just takes work. And we have to not feel broken or judge a lot of it is also self-acceptance. We're so ashamed when we struggle or when our kids struggle as a parent. I felt that same thing. And I'm a psychologist. I'm like, oh my gosh, my kids are struggling. Oh my gosh, I've doubly failed because this is what I'm supposed to be good at, but we have to let go of that and just say, this is what being human about. Mental health is not some endpoint of perfection. So I think all of those things are important when we think about medication and the process of pursuing well-being.
So I'm wondering, what is a short term and what is long term?
I mean, really, it's meant to be used, a few months at a time. After 3, 4, 5, 6 months, I'm not a medical doctor with an MD. I'm a PhD. So I know about I'm a neuroscientist as well. I know about the brain, but I really, really want people to speak to their physicians and understand. The guidelines are there. The recommended durations are there, and the medical professionals are aware of that. What happened is they want to relieve people's pain, but they're not psychologists. And it's a really important point that to actually, eventually you have to feel that pain emotional pain to actually work through it. And and right now there's a benzodiazepine crisis. The third leading cause of prescription overdose death after opioids, 2 different kinds of opioids, are benzodiazepines.
Wow.
Because they're highly addictive. They're nervous system depressants, which means they can stop our heart, slow our breathing, especially when combined with other nervous system depressants like alcohol. And we can take too much by mistake. So they're very serious drugs, but medical professionals, because they want to relieve people's physical pain, their emotional pain, they're giving them too freely. And this is something that I think we're all more aware now. And there's lots of discussions and there's great, documentaries out there and articles, and we need to be really empowered, consumers of medical, of medical healthcare, of healthcare and mental healthcare and physical healthcare. And we really have to know and ask these questions of our doctors when we go in.
Such a good point. And it sounds like they're overprescribed, like say antibiotics were, and we don't
And they
allow
still
our
are
bodies.
antibiotics, as you know. I mean, it's
Yeah.
a problem.
Yeah, our bodies just cannot adapt on their own with a little bit of quote unquote stress, right? We need that to build that resilience. And so it's okay. It sounds like, anxiety is not a bad thing. We just need to have it in the appropriate doses and be able to cope. So, but when we're talking about menopause, I want to go back to the menopausal woman and anxiety, because it's I've read reports anywhere between like 30 to 80% of women feeling anxious in this period of life. So it's not unusual to hear a woman going through the perimenopause. They'll be prescribed antidepressants and all that, and maybe she needs it, maybe she doesn't, like I mentioned. But I'm wondering, how much do you think is anxiety due to the declining sex hormones, or is it because we're experiencing changes in our lives and our lifestyles, or maybe it's the lack of sleep that's contributing, or something else?
So all of the above. And I know that, and I disclosed to you before we got on live, that I just turned 50 this year. And I was sort of saying, oh, I'm sort of perimenopausal, I'm not sure. And now I know for sure I'm perimenopausal. And so I'll speak a little bit from experience as well in answering your question. All of the above, because this is a time of change. And when we're changing, when we're transitioning, whether it's us, whether we're a school-age kid going to school for the first time, or going to college, or changing, or our sex hormones are changing, and we're entering this new stage of our life as women, where not only is it biological change, but there's a lot of social change, how we're perceived, what we do, and how we're perceived for better or for worse, I think. Because I've never, as a person who's, I think it's different depending on your field or what your life's like, but I'm a professional in a certain field, and I feel like I'm at the top of my game. And part of that is being an older woman. And so, this is something too that's changing. When I hear those data that you just talked about, 80% of women experience anxiety, experience depression, I have questions, because is that they're feeling anxious? And I would say, well, God, darn tootin', you feel anxious. I don't know where that darn tootin' came from, but there it is.
And darn tootin'.
Yeah. You feel anxious, and I'm laughing a little because, as I said, I'm going through it. Oh my gosh, it's a lot to have all of these things happening. And again, the emotion of anxiety is about uncertainty. And that's literally what menopause is about. But this anxiety, if we think of it as a normal human emotion, and as we think about it as giving us two things, information and preparation. Now, I'm an emotion scientist. So, every emotion scientist is Darwinian, which means we know that there's evolutionary, adaptiveness to emotions. So when I say information and preparation, let's take menopause. It's, of course, the information I'm getting right now is, oh my gosh, I don't know what my body's going to be like. I'm not sure if I'm going to sleep well. Is there something wrong? Is this a healthy menopausal? A million questions come to mind, and anxiety is showing up to tell me, okay, this is important. You better start thinking, is this bad, or is it okay? Is it going to be okay? And if it's maybe not okay, what can I do to get to the good? And anxiety is what's getting me maybe waking up at 4 a.m. and thinking, okay, I'm really worried, right now about my ability to get through, a night's sleep, or now my ability to work because I can't sleep well, and I'm up and I'm having hot flashes and I'm doing whatever's happening. And so when the information is that you're concerned, but then you can say, okay, I got to listen to this. What do I do? Because once you listen to anxiety, you can prepare. Now, if you don't listen to it, you don't know what's wrong. You just feel yucky. But now you're actually leaning into it, and you're saying, okay, what can I leverage here about what I know, what I'm good at, to solve this problem? And action is the best antidote to anxiety. Not obsessive action or compulsive action, not like on a worry treadmill. I just mean, I'm up at 4 a.m. Let me make a plan for tomorrow. Okay, I'm going to take part in that sleep study, I don't know, that I was interested in, about whether this is menopause or some other sleep problem. Or I'm going to go and look up 2 wellness resources from people I know really know what they're talking about. And I'm going to try something that they suggest about my sleeping problems. Or but you make a plan. And as soon as you make that plan, using anxiety not as something to reject, but as something you're curious about, as information, your anxiety is going to go down because it's telling you you're on the right track. Oh, okay. I'm using this information for preparation. And then once you do, it's a completely different scenario. And it helps you, it actually empowers you not to be owned by that anxiety, but to own it and to leverage it for whatever you can. And then you can let go. And then you can say, okay, but I don't want to be anxious all the time. Now I also have to think about, okay, they tell me breathing is good. Okay, let me breathe. I love, everyone's like, breathe, it'll be okay. But breathing is good. The 4-7-8 technique for us women, when we wake up and our heart's kind of pounding, you breathe in for 4, hold for 7, exhale for 8. Or as long as you're breathing in for half the time that you're exhaling. So you want to breathe in through your nose and exhale for twice as long slowly, your heart rate will slow down. It's biologically impossible not to. It's activating your parasympathetic nervous system. So, we can do these things. Or maybe that you need to exercise. A lot of people, that puts them in the best space they can be in. And exercise is an antidote for a lot of our emotional distress. One of our, a great behavioral and cognitive psychologist once said in a conference I attended, he said, if we psychologists really want to help people, we get them to all exercise. and then we'd see what was left over. And then we'd create boutique treatments and boutique, science-based wellness practices that would help people work through that. And then, therapy, on an as need basis. But so whatever it is, we know how to let go and come back to the present and nurture ourselves and rejuvenate ourselves. But it should be after we try to listen and leverage anxiety. And if we're curious and open about anxiety, we will find those opportunities and then maybe realize, this is more medical. This is something where I really do need to go to my physician and really ask for that support. And if they don't give me that support I need, anxiety is going to keep me persisting and I'll go to another doctor. Do you know what I mean? So this is how we dance with our anxiety. And this is how we're going to be able to make the most of it. And fringe benefit, it'll go down. We'll feel better.
There's so much I want to comment. It's so great. Everything you said, I'm full agreement with. And glad you brought up the breath work. It does lower your heart rate. I swear by it myself when I wake up at night for some reason. And you can literally feel the heart coming down. And you mentioned about problem solving versus the coping mechanism these are two strategies. And it reminds me, when I was doing my master's of gerontology, we had a whole section on stress and how that affects it was the mind-body connection, what this class was all about, which was brilliant. And we were talking exactly like you said, the best approach was to solve the problem, whatever it is. So it's your neighbors hurting all night, and then you can knock on their door if you feel like it and tell them to stop. Or you can cope and say, you know what, it's just one night. Tomorrow I'll, hopefully they won't party tomorrow. So I agree with you. I mean, that's exactly what we learned. And I think it's wonderful. But I'm kind of curious then. So we talked, what is the difference between stress and anxiety?
So stress is not an emotion. It's a calculation. Right. It's a sort of a ratio between the demands that the environment is throwing at us and our ability, especially our perceived ability to meet those demands. And if demands outweigh our capacity, that's when stress starts to feel, burdensome, toxic, but there is such a thing as good stress, right? And people talk about this all the time. And that's when that balance is a little better. So when stress is not just, it sort of encompasses all the emotions, because if we're planning for a wedding, we're going to feel stress, but the emotions we're going to feel will be a combination of anxiety and joy and maybe frustration and maybe, so the stress is sort of this umbrella, this sort of equation we run when we engage in the world and think about, what can I handle it? Can I do this? And how do I refine my ability to handle whatever the curveballs that life throws my way? And under that umbrella are all the emotions that we can feel. And anxiety being a really big emotion that shows up, again, when we're uncertain. Now, anxiety isn't the same as fear, because fear has nothing to do with uncertainty. Fear is if a snake were crawling, a viper all of a sudden came into my apartment in Manhattan, but it was like crawling across the floor towards me. And it was certain and present danger, no doubt, no uncertainty. The information is I'm in danger. And that information prepares us, because it's an evolutionary advantage, to fight, take flight, or freeze. So I would probably take flight, right? If there's really a snake, or maybe I'd freeze and climb. I don't know. Who knows what I do? But that's why anxiety isn't stress. It isn't fear. That's why it's this special thing that we can have a special relationship with. And I'm not saying to people love anxiety. I mean, it sucks. It's terrible. It feels terrible. And I'm not even saying like it, but I do think we have to honor it. And I think we have to reclaim it. And I think we have to, and because it's a way of honoring ourselves in all of our complexity. And when we reclaim it, kind of like, like something we've forgotten, like, because we've rejected it now. So I think of it sort of like it's this gift that's been hiding at the top of our closet, and we find it, or we find like a $10 bill in our pocket. I don't know, or a $100 bill. That's a better analogy. And it's just, we have to engage it and know that, like any vulnerability, it's also a strength. And when we see both our strength and vulnerability in anxiety, that's when we're most truly ourselves. And that's when we're really at our most powerful.
I love how you said that. It makes us feel so much better about this emotion, and rather than pushing it away, but to embrace it and consider it a challenge. And it reminds me a little bit of, I'm not sure if you saw this TED Talk with Kelly
McGonigal. Yeah.
McGonigal.
No, I know it very well.
Yeah, make stress your friend. And it was all about your perception of stress, and use it as a challenge. So it's there's a lot of you explain the difference between the two words, but there's a lot of crossover, and we would use the same word, like I would use just menopause for the peri and the post-menopause difference, right?
Right. Absolutely. And it's funny, I think friend is a great analogy. I think ally is maybe even a better one, because allies, they don't just do what you want. They can be real stinkers. Do you know what I mean? So you have to negotiate, but that's what life is about. And, as women, and we have so much, my friend Reshma Sojani wrote a book called Pay Up, which is about women in the workforce, and she has this great line, she says, where it's, women have been told that we can have it all, but really that's just code for doing it all. And so we have this incredible talk about stress, right? In terms of, well, we have to be like, kill it in the boardroom. We have to be a perfect parent. If we have a partner, we have to be an awesome, sensitive, supportive partner. And we have to, depending on your personality, maybe you want to keep a spotless house, or maybe you want to be, and so we struggle under this expectation from ourselves, from society, of perfection. And I think that there's a much better alternative, which is that we don't have to be perfect. We don't have to flagellate ourselves, self-flagellate when we're anxious. We have to go for excellent, right? We have to go for, and part of being excellent, which is just being our best, is that we have to make mistakes along the way. We have to fail. We have to actually sometimes be just good enough. But that's the only way to get to excellent, because perfectionism is actually a recipe for doing less well, being less creative, less productive, more, problematically anxious and depressed, and all of that. So as I think about being a woman in this world, and also with the added maybe process of menopause, I really think that, and we have to lean into that difficult stuff, whether we call it anxiety or stress or whatever it is. We have to lean in. And I'm not talking about, lean in, because I have some real issues with that. That's another conversation. Because that's I'm not going to play by the boys' rules. We need to change the rules, honestly, is my viewpoint. But I think emotionally engage, and I just think that it helps us forgive ourselves, which gives us more strength.
You spot on. You mentioned one thing I want to reiterate. I think it's important too, is that that anxiety is the unknown that we're worried about, right? It's that uncertainty, and that's exactly what menopause is is where that's where we're at, and we're opening these conversations. You're opening it about anxiety. Women, plenty of women out there who are like me, podcasting or writing articles or bringing out information, because to me it seems menopause is a little bit like Dr. Carrie Jones calls it reverse puberty. And remember, I mean, you didn't know what was going to happen. All you knew was going to blood everywhere, and you're just not really sure, and you were anxious. and and here we are, like 13-year-olds again, going, "What's going to
Oh my
happen?"
gosh, I
Asking
love
your
that.
friends, "Does it
Yeah,
hurt?" Right? And
so
it,
true.
and it's just, yeah. So now we're at the beginning of changing the narrative of menopause and now anxiety, and I'm so glad you're doing that. Now, another thing that you brought up, you said something about toxicity, and it reminded me about the word toxic positivity, which I just learned. Do you know what that is, and does it play a role in anxiety?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I think I think that what toxic positivity is really signifying is this idea that I sort of alluded to before, which is that we think that unless we're always happy, always fully optimized, that something's wrong with us, right? So that that's why we think when we experience anxiety, oh my gosh, it's going to start spiraling because it means something's broken inside me. And it's just, number one, it's so radically false. Number two, it makes everything worse because as soon as you think you're broken, your beliefs start to become reality. And it's an opportunity cost because if you're broken or if you're failing at mental health, because it's like somehow you have to be happy all the time. And it's very American too, it's very like,
Yes.
so I think Europeans have an easier time of it perhaps. But as soon as you feel like, unless I'm happy all the time, there's something really spiraling downwards. It just is an opportunity cost in actually doing helpful things when it comes to anxiety. It keeps you from seeing, again, it's contracting you. So, when you work with kids and talk about anxiety, a great therapeutic approach, if you know what a Hoberman sphere is, it's that sphere that kind of, it's like very geometric, and then you open it up and it's still the sphere and it closes down. A
Yes.
lot of parents know this because
Yes.
it's like
Sure.
sort of popular, right?
Had one.
Yeah. And so anxiety is sort of like, or this toxic positivity in a way, as soon as you feel that negative emotion, it's like, oh my gosh, it blocks you from seeing that, oh, wait a second, you have to kind of open up the sphere so you can see
Yes.
through again and say, you know what, I'm falling down now, but I'm gonna get up tomorrow. And that's okay. And that's actually okay. And I actually am really struggling, but this is the point where if I pivot, or if I actually push through this one roadblock, my horizon is going to be completely different. So all of a sudden the possibilities have changed because I haven't contracted, I've expanded. So and I've become flexible instead of rigid. If there's one thing that keeps us on a path towards mental health problems, it's rigidity. It's not finding ways to sometimes bob and weave, to sometimes have a fast fall, but then jump up again and stumble along for a few miles. So it's that flexibility and how we find that in our lives. And I just think menopause is exactly that time because of the reverse puberty of it all, our identity. I mean, it's not just biological, it's our identity as women, and that's another good reason it's like reverse puberty, right? I mean, it's just, what are our possibilities? So if we engage in this hard, messy work, I think, like, I'm 50, I'm actually starting to do all these new things in my career and in my life. And I just feel like in a way, menopause freed me up to do that, and we're at our best, we know how to do shit. Excuse me. I'm so sorry if that's not allowed on your
Yes.
podcast.
Oh, we use that all the
Like,
time.
we
No worries.
know how to do, it's like, yeah, like back maybe, just even like 1,000 years ago, I don't know, like prehistorically, when it was a matriarchy, if we survived this long, we were freaking running the show as matriarchs. I mean, for good reason. And I just feel like it's like anxiety is we think it's a wall, but it's a path, it's pushing us forward. because it's really an opportunity. And again, it stinks. It sucks. Don't like it. Don't love it. But God, we can make it our superpower if we just build those skills little by little.
And it's part of being human. And we have to just, I like how you say lean into it. And that's why I've kind of mentioned toxic positivity, because I'm one of those diehard positive people. And that's just the way I am. And so, but I've been learning about the negative emotions, and they will build up and bite you in the ass if you don't look at it. And I had this argument because I was one of these people. I'm like, I hate complainers. I don't like people who just, complain all the time. And those are negative emotions. And of course I have trauma and all that. Why even go there? But I was told that you need to not, I don't want to, you don't need to sit there and wallow in your grief or sadness or anger or whatever you're feeling. It's just acknowledging it, knowing it's there and honoring it. And then you move on. And I thought that was really interesting. Like, it's part of being human. It's okay to feel those feelings. Because for me, it was like, it's not okay. I don't want to be there. Like, just get out of there.
It's such great advice. And the thing about it that's so interesting to me as I've thought about this is, I've been a mental health professional for 20 years. And we do tell people, get rid of it. As soon as you feel it, you better deal with it, right? But, here's what happens when you start cutting off those parts of yourself, the negative parts. You start to cut off the positive parts, the parts that can find joy, that can find, excitement and curiosity. So once you start, amputating certain emotions, you amputate the others. And here's the other thing. We don't fear that when we feel really happy, that it's going to spiral out of control.
Yeah.
but we feel,
Yeah,
we
right.
feel, and I was talking to Dr. Eliza Pressman on her podcast about this, and I want to give her the credit for this thought, because I love this thought. Like, so why do we think that our negative emotions will automatically spiral? That's why we can't allow ourselves to feel them. And sometimes trauma is part of that, and sometimes it's that's how we talk about it.
Yeah.
And I think that when we remember that all of these, not just anxiety, this is just a poster child for our negative emotions, right? All of the negative emotions we treat this way, that we feel like, oh my gosh, if we start sinking down, we're never going to stop. And it's not true. As you say, that's how you honor it. And then you move on. It's the only way.
Yeah, I love that. We don't get worried about, we're not going to be too happy because it might just get out of control.
Like, tamp down on that. Pump the brakes on that. Of course, you have to be my age to know what pump the brakes even means.
Yeah. Yeah, don't get too happy.
Yeah.
Be dangerous.
Oh boy.
So, okay, but this to me, what I'm hearing a lot is our perception of this anxiety as well, and how to cope with it. But I think it's harder. It's easier said than done, in the sense that I can imagine for someone who is really, feeling desperate and having that, it's so easy to go negative with that. The negative mind just sort of kicks in and thinks of the worst that can happen.
Yes.
Right. There are people like that who that's all they think is a plan B, just in case plan A falls apart, and they can, just have a backup plan. Their whole lives are about the worst that can happen. Yes. So how hard is it to turn things around and start to think things like everything you've been telling us about, like to start thinking that way?
It's hard. I don't want to say it's easy. At the same time, it is a habit of thinking, and habits can be broken and new habits built. And that's, and I really do encourage everyone, whether they think, and sometimes it's stigma. We don't want to think we have an anxiety disorder. Don't worry about that. We can always go to a therapist. We can always go to someone who can give us new ideas. Think about it like a skill building. Think about it like fitness. I've talked with people before about letting go of this term mental health and turning it to mental fitness, not because mental health is bad, but when we think mental health, we think mental illness automatically. We actually don't think about a positive state of health.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But when we say fitness, we think about a positive state, right? Of well-being. So let's think mental fitness. It is hard if we have lifelong habits, yes, but it's not impossible. And we can build up these skills consciously through practices, even thinking, like, even with a negative, like all of that is a habit of protecting yourself, of trying to control a world that's really scary a lot of the time. And all of those contortions, again, it's a contortion, right? I love a therapeutic approach that's called acceptance and commitment therapy. It's so beautiful. It's all about this. In some ways, my book is sort of read that and then do acceptance and commitment therapy. Because it's sort of, because really the acceptance about it is exactly what I'm saying, is about we have to accept these feelings and actually accept suffering before we can alleviate suffering. And then commit to purposeful action. And for me, when we leverage anxiety, it's about leveraging anxiety for the things we care about our purpose, about what matters to us. So if we have this habit of thinking about negative things, it's actually in there somewhere is our purpose, about our, like, why do we get up in the morning? Because you're only anxious when you care. And when we start hitching anxiety to what matters to us in the world, and when we take time for social connection, not just receiving, but giving to others, anxiety will start to shift. These habits will start to serve us. We can get flexible. Again, flexibility, we can gain that. So I really encourage people. I want to say it is hard. There's nothing in what I'm saying that makes it simple. And sometimes in a lot of conversations like this, I laugh and I think about it afterwards. I'm like, it's just because we're all in this. Like, I'm in this. I go through these thoughts and these experiences on and off all the time. And we have to, when we have humor about it and we accept it as part of, like, oh my gosh, I'm such a mess sometimes. It's another way of accepting and committing, right? So it's really this mindset, and it's a new mindset, because the mindsets we have is that it's a disease, the disease mindset, or that it's a character flaw, it's a weakness. And all of that sets us up to avoid and self-punish and actually, and stay in these negativity cycles. So I would say to someone who's struggled with this for a long time, there is help. You can change it. Consider acceptance and commitment therapy. Consider cognitive behavioral therapy. These are great tools. And what you'll do is you'll be more yourself. You won't be less of yourself. That's one thing that I would definitely say.
You've got some great tips, because one of my question was a woman going through menopause transition, and she's having a bit of anxiety. What can we do to cope? You've given some great tips in terms of using, the acceptance commitment behavior, the cognitive behavior therapy, the problem solving when you wake up in the middle of the night, breath work. There's a lot of great stuff. And one thing I found on your website is that you were doing this gamifying, an app that was gamifying, I don't know, to manage the anxiety. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, I'd love to. So this is my company, Arcade Therapeutics. I actually, in a way, I started this company 15 years ago, but we just founded it a handful of years ago with my co-founder, Rajamin, because it's science first. So I'm a scientist, as well as a clinical psychologist. And about 10 or 15 years ago, I started doing research on digital therapies. So actually therapies that are cognitive, that help change our habits of thinking, that are meant to be on screens, that are actually, what we would call digital native. Right.
Yeah.
And I think what my insight was at the time, as I started doing research and really testing whether these helped alleviate anxiety, was that we can't, we have to reduce stigma too, and we have to get them into people's hands. So we create mobile games where we embed this clinically validated treatment approach, where the goal is to actually change our unconscious habits when we're anxious. And those unconscious habits can be described, one way of describing them is the threat bias. So when we're anxious, as kind of as we've been talking about, we get stuck in these negativity loops, right? So unconsciously, when we look at the world, we have this filter. And we filter in the negative, and we sort of can't even see the positive sometimes. And it gets to become a rigid habit. So if I'm giving a public speech, say there are 100 people in front of me, with a threat bias, I like a spotlight, I notice that there's just this one guy falling asleep in the back row, right? and it's like it filters it right in, and it's a spotlight of my attention. And I can't notice on some level that 99 people are smiling and engaged and fully with me. And what happens when we have this unconscious habit of attention, kind of like our conscious habits of negativity and worry, is it drives the vicious cycle of anxiety, right? It puts our fight flight system on a hair trigger, and it just revs us up. And so it makes anxiety worse, and it keeps us from coping flexibly. And so what our games that we've created, and our first one targets social anxiety and social anxiety disorder, is it helps to kind of change that spotlight, get the spotlight off so we can flexibly scan the audience and start to notice all the kinds of information. So it's not that we never notice the negative, but now we're flexibly able to notice the positive and the negative. But it's in this brief game that keeps you on the screen just 10 minutes a day, a few days a week.
Oh, that's not a lot.
And you do it for a month. And what our randomized clinical trials have shown, and we have placebo-controlled randomized clinical trials, is that when you use this game, it's doing the work for you because it's a subconscious habit. You're just learning to pay attention differently. That when you do it for a month, clinical levels of clinical anxiety severity go down by a whole, if you're clinically socially anxious or generally anxious, it goes down a whole severity level. We found that there's reductions in anxiety for 90% of people that we've tested this with, which is a pretty big number, honestly.
Very big.
Right. And it's really engaging and brief, and it's not sticking you on screens, because of course screens can get us, even more anxious sometimes. And it's a fun, casual game. So we don't feel like, it's some white coat telling us, a doctor in a white coat telling, here, take your medicine. It's really empowering people to build new skills that are hard to get at with other techniques because a lot of them are unconscious.
So where do we get the app? How do we play around with it?
Well, right now, so it's on the App Store, and we just are actually starting to offer this through doctors' offices, through some partnerships with women's health organizations. So it is on the App Store. Stay tuned and sign up, because we're going to be giving, people want to sign up. They get a code and they just download it right from the app or Google Play Store, the Apple Store, the Google Play Store. It's called Star Starter.
Starter. Okay,
there's sort of a light space theme because, we're a bit of sci-fi nerds, but it's not just for space fans. It's just kind of fun and engaging. And again, what we're doing at Arcade, and it's just really the same mission as what I've been talking to you about this whole conversation, is we're trying to change how mental health is thought of and how we pursue it. And it's all about destigmatization. It's about, our mental health system is frankly broken. And not only is it accessing treatment, so we're trying to give much more access to people, that, when you do seek help, often you have to wait months and months to see a therapist. Maybe medications are right or not right for you. And this is something you can do immediately to alleviate anxiety. And we're not giving you snake oil, it's clinical evidence. And so we're really trying to fill that healthcare gap while empowering people to feel not broken, not, there's nothing I can do, but rather to build new skills and know that mental health is a process, not an endpoint. So it's a different way of thinking about and pursuing and building mental health. And so it's something I'm really passionate about.
It sounds exciting and easy.
It's doing the work for us. Yeah. And then you have to do the work in life, but it helps. It helps. It gets you into the boxing ring, so to speak.
It's better than medication, I think.
Well, I don't want to, just because I don't want to, compare. It's different. It's different. And it's not going to be the solution for every 100% of people. And, and I just want to say, be empowered to explore whether medication is part of your solution. I beg people not to make it the only solution, because as the only solution, that I can say 100%, it's not the right choice as the only solution. But if it needs to be part of your solution with cognitive behavioral therapy, with digital therapeutics like Star Starter, with science-based wellness practices, with going to a spiritual advisor, with just exercising regularly, with talking to a best friend on a weekly basis, whatever it is, these are things that we can curate and build, all these tools.
Exercise and play the game at the same time is what I'm thinking.
I like that. Yeah, I personally like that.
And play the game,
and then see where you are.
Yeah, so exciting. So Star Starter. When does that come out again? You said it.
Well, it's on the App Store now, and we're just when you download it, you could go do a sign up page, and we can get your information and let people know when they can sign up for it.
Oh, I'm gonna try that. So you also, I think it's been a year now that you wrote this book, Future Tense, right? Why anxiety is good for you.
Right up on our 1 year anniversary. Yeah.
Yeah. So I normally read all the books of everybody who comes on the show, but I didn't get a chance to get this one, but I will read it. I think what you've said is absolutely brilliant and changing the narrative of this word called anxiety and how to approach it. The book, we can find it on your website, I think, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Or anywhere you buy books. It's called Future Tense: Why Anxiety is Good for You, Even Though It Feels Bad. That title might make more sense to people now that they've heard me talk for a little while.
Yes.
It's a little controversial. But you can get that on, and also you can see links on my website, which is drtracyphd.com.
Great. I have links to that in the show notes, as well as you got Instagram, Dr. Tracy, You're on Twitter, Tracy A. Dennis, and LinkedIn, Tracy Dennis-Tiwary. And I'll have links for that for everyone to go and check you out and more what you're doing. It's so exciting. I'm so glad you came on. Before I let you go, do you have any last words for a woman going through menopause?
I do, and I'm just kind of thinking about, what do I tell myself when I get up every morning? So, and that is that that change is opportunity, and sometimes it sucks, but we got this.
Great. Oh, thank you. We got this and we're in it together. So
We're
with
in it
your help,
together.
even better. Thank you so much, Tracy. I really appreciate it. And I hope to have you on again when you got a new book or a new app or whatever it is that's going on, maybe your research. We'd love to have you on again.
Thank you, Zora. What a pleasure. Great to see you.